Charles has named his youngest brother Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his death.
Something explosive was quietly unfolding behind the iron gates of Sandringham, and the people responsible believed no one powerful enough would ever catch them. They believed the king's private estate was empty, the calendar was clear, and the palace machine was asleep. But what they did not expect, what they never planned for, was the sudden arrival of the one royal who never ignores the smallest irregularity. And when he stepped through those doors, what he discovered would ignite one of the most shocking internal royal confrontations in recent memory. The morning had begun with deceptive calm. Sandringham looked peaceful, almost sleepy, the kind of quiet that convinces people they can bend rules without consequence. Staff moved through the corridors, carrying out ordinary duties, polishing surfaces, checking deliveries, preparing rooms that normally remained untouched unless the king himself was expected. Officially, there were no royal engagements scheduled, no dignitaries, no family gatherings, no reason for anything unusual to occur. Yet beneath that ordinary rhythm, something strange was happening. Orders had quietly circulated among certain members of staff. Tables needed to be arranged. Kitchen preparations had to begin earlier than usual. Deliveries were arriving through the service entrance instead of the main gate. And the instructions were strangely vague, wrapped in that careful language palace employees recognize immediately, the kind that says, do the job but don't ask questions. Then the unfamiliar faces began appearing. Men in suits no one recognized. Assistants carrying boxes and folders, catering staff who were clearly not part of the royal kitchen team. They walked through the halls with confidence, as if they had every right to be there. Staff exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. Inside a royal household, curiosity can be dangerous. The safest approach is always obedience. Outside, delivery vans lined the service road. Crates of wine were unloaded. Boxes of ingredients were rushed inside. The activity was frantic, almost secretive, as though everyone involved understood that if the wrong person arrived, everything would collapse instantly. And then the wrong person arrived. Just before noon, a dark car rolled through the gates. No fanfare, no escort vehicles, just one vehicle carrying a royal who had decided to conduct a routine inspection of roof repairs on the east wing. Prince Edward. He had not come looking for trouble. He had simply come to check the progress of work on the estate, something he insisted on doing personally instead of delegating. The visit should have been brief, 45 minutes at most. Sign the paperwork, speak with contractors, and leave. But as the car approached the front of the house, Edward noticed something immediately. Too many cars. Not staff vehicles, not contractor vans, luxury cars with polished finishes and private license plates. Vehicles belonging to wealthy guests who clearly believed they were attending something exclusive. Edward stepped out slowly, his posture calm but alert. Near the entrance stood men speaking urgently into their phones, while young chefs hurried past carrying trays of prepared dishes. The entire scene pulsed with activity that had absolutely no place inside the king's private residence. He walked toward the front steps. The estate manager intercepted him, attempting a polite delay. There was mention of a private arrangement, a suggestion that perhaps Edward could wait while a phone call clarified the situation. Edward didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the man. That single glance carried enough authority that the manager stepped aside immediately. Edward walked inside. The first thing that struck him was the smell. Rich sauces, roasted meats, fresh bread, expensive wine, the unmistakable scent of a fully operating restaurant kitchen drifting through rooms that had hosted monarchs for generations. Then he heard the laughter. Not the restrained, polite laughter typical of royal gatherings. This was loud, relaxed, confident. The laughter of people who believed they were attending something extraordinary. Edward followed the sound down the corridor and reached the doorway of the king's private drawing room and stopped. The sight inside was almost surreal. One of the most historically protected rooms on the estate had been transformed into something that resembled a luxury dining club. Tables were arranged around priceless antique furniture. Wine glasses rested carelessly on centuries-old surfaces. Plates of partially eaten food sat on tables never meant to hold meals at all. Printed menus lay beside each guest. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed lettering. But the most shocking detail stood at the center of the room, holding a glass of red wine, laughing with a group of sharply dressed businessmen. Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son. He was speaking casually, gesturing toward paintings that belonged to the king himself, describing the space as though he were hosting guests in his own private home. Edward stood silently in the doorway for nearly a full minute, watching, counting. observing the sheer audacity unfolding in front of him. Eventually, Tom noticed him. The shift in his expression was instant. Surprise flickered across his face before being quickly replaced by an exaggerated smile. "Well, Uncle Edward, what a surprise to see you here." He moved forward with an extended hand. Edward didn't take it. His eyes slowly scanned the room again before returning to Tom. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every person nearby heard it. "Explain to me why there are strangers sitting in His Majesty's home." The room fell silent. Guests froze mid-conversation. Tom tried to laugh it off, insisting it was a harmless gathering, a small lunch with friends, something his mother had casually approved. But Edward's attention had already shifted to a nearby table, a document partially hidden beneath a wine bottle. He lifted it, read it, and everything changed. The paper was a printed booking summary. 5,000 per guest, 12 guests, £60,000 collected for a single afternoon event held inside the King's private residence, marketed as an exclusive curated royal estate dining experience under Tom Parker Bowles's brand. No royal authorization, no approval, no paperwork, no permission from the King. Edward placed the paper back on the table and delivered his verdict. The event was over. Immediately, guests began gathering their belongings in confusion, whispering among themselves as they realized something was terribly wrong. They had believed they were attending a rare opportunity, a legitimate glimpse into royal life. Instead, they had unknowingly walked into something that looked dangerously close to a private business operation running inside the King's home without his knowledge. Staff members moved quickly, relief written across their faces. They had known all morning that something about the event felt wrong. Now someone had finally said it out loud. Tom attempted to protest. Edward didn't argue. He simply turned and walked toward the kitchen, and what he discovered there would make the situation even more explosive. Temporary gas burners had been installed on countertops never designed to withstand that level of heat. Dark scorch marks scarred the surfaces. Supplies from outside vendors, none approved by the estate, were stacked near the service door. But the most revealing discovery lay among a pile of printed menus and supplier receipts. A small handwritten note. Edward recognized the handwriting instantly. Camilla's, instructions detailing which rooms Tom could use, which staff could be trusted, and one final line written almost casually: "Just don't let it become a habit." Edward folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket. Then, he stepped outside into the cold Sandringham air and reached for his phone. The call he was about to make would change everything inside the royal family. And the voice that answered on the other end had no idea the storm that was about to break. The phone rang 4 times before it was answered. On the other end of the line, the voice sounded relaxed, warm, completely unaware that a crisis had just erupted inside one of the most private royal estates in the country. Queen Camilla began chatting casually about the weather, the quiet countryside, the usual polite exchanges that normally framed royal conversations. For most people, that tone would have been comforting. But standing alone in the freezing gardens of Sandringham, Prince Edward wasn't calling for small talk. In his pocket sat the evidence of something far more serious, and he knew the moment demanded absolute clarity. He waited until she paused for breath. Then he spoke. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, choosing every word with deliberate precision. "Forgive the interruption, but I'm standing at Sandringham at this very moment, and I need to ask you something directly. What exactly did you know about what Tom was doing here today?" The line went silent. Not the silence of a dropped call. The kind of silence that arrives when someone realizes the conversation has suddenly turned dangerous. Edward had used her full title intentionally. It was not just respect. It was a signal. A reminder that this was no longer a casual family conversation between relatives. This was a prince of the blood addressing the Queen about a serious breach involving the King's private property. When Camilla spoke again, her tone was controlled, but different. She explained that Tom had asked permission for a small lunch gathering. Nothing elaborate, just friends, something informal and harmless. She described it as a quiet social occasion that wouldn't disturb anyone. Edward listened. He let her finish. Then he read one line from the document he had found. £5,000 per guest. The silence returned. Longer this time. When Camilla spoke again, her voice had slowed, every word measured carefully. She said she hadn't realized Tom intended to charge guests. According to her explanation, he must have taken her informal approval too far. She insisted the situation could still be resolved quietly. Perhaps the household staff could smooth things over before the King ever needed to hear about it. Edward stared out at the frozen gardens while she spoke. The winter sun reflected off the thin layer of frost covering the grass. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful, but Edward knew the truth was far from peaceful, because there was one piece of information Camilla didn't realize he had. "The note," Edward said quietly. Another pause. "The one written in your handwriting, instructing Tom which rooms to use, and and which staff would cooperate. This time, the silence stretched so long it almost felt like the connection had gone dead. Finally, her voice returned. The warmth was still there, but the easy, casual tone was gone. "Edward," she said slowly, her voice now tight with caution. "I think we need to handle this very carefully." That was the moment everything became clear. This was not a misunderstanding. Tom had not simply gone too far with casual permission. Camilla had known. She had helped organize it. She had guided her son on how to run the event quietly, deliberately keeping the king unaware. Edward ended the call. He stood motionless in the cold garden for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just been confirmed. Then he walked back to his car, because there was only one person who needed to hear the truth next: King Charles. That afternoon, the king was at Highgrove. He was doing something he often did when the pressures of monarchy became overwhelming. He was in his walled garden, tending to the herbs and plants he cared about so deeply. His hands were covered in soil as he worked quietly beside a bed of rosemary. The tension in the room was thick. Camilla maintained her usual calm composure, but those who knew her well could see the strain beneath the surface. Tom Parker Bowles spoke very little, and Edward watched everything. Every glance, every pause, every unspoken message passing across the table. Finally, when the meal ended and the staff cleared the dishes, the king spoke. His voice was calm, but his decision was final. Tom Parker Bowles was banned from entering any crown or private royal estate property for 5 years. The £60,000 collected from the event would be donated to the king's charitable foundation, and Tom would personally write letters of apology to the Sandringham staff he had placed in such an impossible situation. Camilla's consequence, however, would never be announced publicly. Her informal authority over royal estates was quietly revoked. From that moment forward, all estate decisions would go directly through the king's office. On the surface, nothing changed. She continued appearing beside the king at official engagements. But inside palace walls, everyone knew the balance of trust had shifted forever. That weekend, Charles returned to Highgrove. Back to the garden, back to the rosemary plants, hands once again in the soil. He never spoke publicly about what had happened, but before the dinner ended at Windsor, he delivered one final sentence to Tom. Calm, direct, unforgettable. The estates are not assets to be borrowed, they are responsibilities to be carried. In royal life, trust is everything, and once broken, it leaves a scar no public silence can ever truly erase.